and welcome to this special edition of Inside the Americas. Covid-19 is battering the world, with Latin America being particularly hard hit. The region is now facing not just a record human death toll, but devastating economic damage as well. Policymakers say the pandemic could wipe out 2 decades of social progress and push tens of millions of people back into poverty. I'm Jeannie Godula. Latin America is home to just 8% of the world's population, and yet it currently has half the world's new coronavirus deaths. Despite months of strict lockdowns, cases continue to multiply, making Latin America the new hotspot for the virus. Public health systems, stunted by years of underfunding, are just unable to cope. It's a bitter blow for the continent that's taken COVID-19's biggest financial hit as well.
Across Latin America, some 53% of workers are employed within the informal economy, with neither a contract nor social security to fall back on. Here in Mexico, 12 million informal workers have lost their source of income since the start of the coronavirus epidemic.
A los que tienen suelo, a los que tienen ahorro, sí puede gastar la casa, pero los artesanos y los indígenas que vivimos al día aquí en la Ciudad de México, no podemos quedar la casa porque no hay con qué comer, con qué vivir.
In Peru, where 70% of the active population works within the informal sector, it's also difficult for millions of poverty-stricken workers to respect lockdown measures. The number of COVID-19 victims hasn't stopped rising there for 3 months, making it the second most affected country behind Brazil.
Latin America is the most inequitable region in the world. We have big cities like Rio, Sao Paulo, Lima, in where they are surrounded by belt of poverty and inequities. So the same lockdown that was applied in Europe to a certain extent cannot be completely applied.
The pandemic is striking particularly hard for countries already in recession. In May, Argentina went into default for the 9th time in its history, while Venezuela's GDP is expected to sink by 18%. The World Food Programme expects this economic situation to push nearly 14 million people into food insecurity.
Estamos entrando a una fase muy complicada a nivel de todo el mundo, a nivel de la región, y es lo que nosotros hemos llamado la pandemia del hambre.
The Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean predicts the coronavirus pandemic will push 29 million more people into poverty in the region, amounting to an economic crisis similar to the Great Depression of the 1930s.
Latin America is not only suffering from the shutdown of its own economies, it's also losing out on billions regularly sent in from migrant workers in other countries around the world. $100 billion were transferred into Latin America last year alone. Latin American workers in the U.S. and Europe sent funds back to some 40 million homes in Colombia, Guatemala, and almost 40% coming from Mexican workers. But with lockdowns in place, many of those jobs and transfers came to an end. The World Bank says funds transferred back into Latin America this year will drop by almost 20%. Not all Latin American migrant workers head to the world's richest nations, though. Some 2 million Venezuelans have gone to Colombia to try their luck there. Colombia is the region's 4th biggest economy, and the death rates from COVID-19 are much lower. But the virus is still not under control, and that's forced extended lockdowns, increasing the economic damage there. Some Venezuelan refugees are now giving up their Colombian dream and want to go home.
La bolsa para la necesidad del perro, la bolsa para la papelera, la bolsa para el apartamento.
During mandatory confinement, it's difficult to make sales on the deserted streets of Bogotá.
Y se nos ha hecho mucho por la trabajo por la pandemia. Hemos sufrido demasiado, pero estamos luchando por un mejor futuro.
Every day, these Venezuelan migrants walk kilometers to try to earn enough to pay their daily rent.
Pagamos, nos corren con los niños, no podemos dormir en la calle con los niños porque me da miedo con la pandemia.
Venezuelans have fled the crisis hitting their country in droves. Today, it's the pandemic that plunges many of them into misery. On the outskirts of Bogotá, On the highway to Venezuela, families have set up camp in recent weeks. Jose Gregorio was one of the first to settle here.
Comenzamos alrededor de 12 personas y ahora nos encontramos 421 personas. Nos encontrábamos en situación de calle, sin empleo, sin trabajo ya. Nos corrieron de los arriendos. Decidimos reunirnos.
Most lived off informal work. Jesus was a cook in an upscale hotel. He was fired overnight.
Que realmente habemos muchos acá que teníamos una vida ya establecidos, arriendos, buenos puestos laborales, pero por medio de la situación del COVID, pues nosotros en cierta parte fuimos más afectados. Somos extranjeros, somos inmigrantes.
The conditions are unsanitary. No toilets, no running water. But there's no shortage of food.
Nadie viene del gobierno. Fundaciones y los colombianos hermanos de buen corazón que cuando pasan ven a los venezolanos y nos hacen entregas si sea de una botella de agua.
All wish to return to their home country, but the Venezuelan government has restricted border crossings. Without money or authorization to travel, they're stuck here.
Y yo quiero compartir algo bíblico, algo que pueda devolvernos la esperanza, la fe que de pronto algunos de nosotros hemos perdido por la situación en la cual estamos enfrentando.
More and more migrants are finding refuge in religion.
Vamos a abrazarnos como un solo pueblo de Venezuela.
According to the authorities, more than 24,000 Venezuelans in Colombia aim to return to their home country. There, another harsh reality awaits.
As the economic crisis in Latin America grows, one of the biggest concerns is food insecurity. With such a large part of the workforce out of jobs during lockdown, the poor are only getting poorer and are having trouble accessing food. The various impacts of coronavirus could lead to what the UN is calling a hunger pandemic. You can take a look at the situation here with these pictures from Guatemala, where people are lining up for food. This video was taken just outside a restaurant in Guatemala that's doing its part to help the people it can. It's called Rayuela GT. And to tell us a bit more about that now, I'm joined from Guatemala City by restaurant volunteer Lorena Ortiz. Lorena, welcome to the show. First, how did the restaurant start giving people these free meals?
What happened was we were put into a lockdown and everything closed, basically, as everywhere else in the world. And the owners thought that they could give a few meals to people. The area where the restaurant is, it's a little bit, there's shelter, so there are homeless. So they thought that they'd give a few meals to the people who needed it. It started with 35 meals the first day, and then the next day it was 150, the following day 200, and now we've given, for example, last week we gave out 3,000 meals.
We're seeing those pictures now of those lines that are so long, filled with all these people hoping to get something to eat. I imagine you can't always have enough food for everyone. Do you have a way of deciding who gets a meal?
Yes. We had to start prioritizing, and we have 3 lines. One line is for disabled people, seniors, and women with children. There is another line for older senior men. And the third line is for young men and healthy men. So we start giving out the food to the more needy, I guess. And if we don't have enough, we believe that a young, strong man, it's able to get a meal elsewhere rather than the other people, than a senior citizen.
Lorena, tell us a bit more about your own story. Why did you personally want to get involved to help make meals for the hungry?
My earliest memory from when I lived here in Guatemala, it's the earthquake of 1976. Most of the country was torn down by the earthquake. We were probably living out of a tent about 3-6 months. We would go to places like I would assume this project that it's in place right now, and we would go get medicine, we would go get our shots and food. So now that I am here in Guatemala and this happened, I found that it was time for me to give back what was given to me all those years ago.
How does what you're seeing today compare? Have you ever seen anything this bad when it comes to people going hungry?
I've spoken to many people. There's always been hunger. There's always been homelessness. However, never as bad as now. And I see it. I've seen it in the lines from when I started. You used to see just homeless people. Now you see the average low middle class person who goes and lines up. They have to swallow their pride, and they are there for, we guarantee them at least one meal a day.
Lorena Ortiz, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, and thank you for all your work helping to feed the hungry in Guatemala. Well, that's all the time we have for today's look at the devastating financial situation in Latin America. We'll see you soon for the next Inside the Americas for all the news from north to south.
The last few months have sometimes felt like we are living in a Hollywood blockbuster. A deadly virus, the frantic search for a vaccine, international travel suspended, and life upended for billions of people. On France 24, we're trying to make sense of these extraordinary times in a program called The New Normal, featuring reporting from our correspondents around the world.
The New Normal on France 24 and France24.com.